Hello, and welcome to Making Creativity Pay, the podcast where we talk to people in creative industries about how they promote and market their work. I'm Dan Barnett, and on this episode I spoke with Geoff Rowe of the Live Comedy Association. We talk about the first Live Comedy Day, which takes place on April the 1st, as well as the wider aims of the Live Comedy Association. We also discuss the Live Comedy Survey conducted by Brunel University on the live comedy sector, as well as comparisons with organisations in other sectors such as the Music Venue Trust. I started by asking Geoff to give a brief introduction about himself.
Hello, my name's Geoff Rowe. I'm currently supporting the Live Comedy Association to deliver on their main objective, which is to get government to recognise live comedy as an essential part of the creative industries. I've had 35 years experience of working in live comedy. I set up and developed Leicester Comedy Festival for 30 years and also have produced other comedy events and comedy shows and been involved in comedy for a very long time. So, thanks for asking me on.
No, fantastic. Yes, so it's middle of March at the moment. You've got Live Comedy Day coming up on the 1st of April. I don't know if you wanted to kind of talk a little bit about that and the genesis of it.
So the Live Comedy Association has been working since, I think it was 2021, I think, around that time, to be a membership organisation for people working in live comedy. So our initial focus, of course, was around the pandemic and what on earth was going to happen in terms of live comedy. And so that was our initial focus. And then when we came out of the pandemic, the LCA started to think about what its overarching objective might be, what its long-term objective might be. And I think I said that the overall objective is to get live comedy recognised as an essential part of the creative industries by the UK government. I think it's really important to establish that as a kind of baseline, I suppose, because some people, I think, get a bit confused and think that our main priority is to demand for Arts Council funding or whatever else. And our sort of stance is that those things, if we're not written into policies and strategies and plans of the government, then those other things won't happen unless there's a kind of robust framework to work within. So we're really clear on that. And there's a number of things that we are doing and have done to try and achieve that objective. So, for example, we've now published 3 surveys of the comedy sector to kind of demonstrate the size and scale and impact that we have. So from that first survey, for example, we know that over £1 billion is generated in ticket sales from live comedy each year. And there's a report that's published from that survey, which is produced and written by colleagues at the Centre for Comedy Studies Research, which is based at Brunel University. We're also doing a whole load of meetings, as you might imagine, with policymakers, civil servants, politicians. But we felt that the profile of live comedy and the work that's done could do with a bit of a boost, really, I suppose, and raise the profile of live comedy. And you probably know, people listening probably know that there's all sorts of national days for all sorts of things, but there's certainly a national day for independent record shops, for example, and that's been hugely successful. So we felt about 6 months ago that there could be a live comedy day, and I guess because of our network of people working across the sector, across the UK, we thought that there would be an appetite from people to take part, and it turns out that we were right about that. So we've currently got about, I think, 60 or 70 events registered on livecomedyday.co.uk, and all I can tell you as of today is there is a significant amount of media interest in the project. I've had a very exciting email this morning, which I can't tell you about, from somebody who wants to talk to a media organisation. They're pretty big. We're already working with Radio 4 on the project, so it's not them, but it's somebody of equal stature. And I think it's just live comedy day is is a celebration of live comedy. It's a positive thing. It's not a direct lobbying tool. We're not making any demands necessarily of anybody. We just want to say it's really bloody good, and there's lots of live comedy. And I think the only other thing I would say as well is that what became very apparent very early on in terms of my association with the Live Comedy Association is there has never been, people are surprised by this, but there has never been a voice for the live comedy sector. As I think I said, I've worked in this world for over 30 years, and there isn't a membership organization. There hasn't been a voice. If you work in theatre or music or dance or film or crafts or any of these places, there's numerous membership organizations who kind of represent what they're doing. Live comedy's never had that until the LCA was set up, and we're enormously proud of the fact that we are a membership organization. We represent 1,500 people who work in the sector, and so we're working to be that voice, I suppose, of people who are embedded in our sector, who understand our sector, and want to champion it and make it more secure in the long term, I guess.
How do you differentiate or bring together the kind of various areas? So like you said, you might have a full-time comedy club, you might have a venue that has regular comedy nights, and then you've got comedians, and then also people around it in the comedy industry. I mean, how difficult is it to bring those different bits together?
So although we've been sort of in existence for 6 years or 5 years or whatever it is, I have to say it's quite difficult. We don't have much structure as a sector. There is no conference for live comedy. There's no trade fair. It's always been done quite informally. So the stereotypical example is people talk in bars and venues after shows, and do their networking at those opportunities, which is great. So I think we're starting almost from zero in terms of trying to engage with people. And of course, I guess what's implicit in your question is that there's lots of different business models for different parts of the sectors, and people might have heard of Phil McIntyre or Avalon, who are big agencies, big promotion companies. They are very different to a small comedy club in Swansea. And actually, the thing that, having run a festival for 30 years, what I know very well is that not all festivals are organised in the same way. Not all venues are organised in the same way. So it's quite a complicated world that we're working in. There's an awful lot of, I'll call it voluntary involvement. People who have full-time jobs. There may be an accountant, or I don't know what they might be, who also happen to love live comedy and so produce a sort of regular club or indeed a regular festival. But I think Live Comedy Day and other things that we're doing demonstrates that there is an appetite from the sector to try and work more collaboratively. A stat, I don't know whether this is helpful or not, but our model is very much based on a thing called the Music Venues Trust, who've done amazingly well in terms of grassroots live music and establishing that as a thing. So I quite often use the phrase grassroots live comedy. So our focus is, broadly speaking, we haven't quite defined it yet, but broadly speaking, venues under about 800 capacity. So we think the O2 in London is brilliant in terms of the comedy that they put on, but that's not our focus. Our focus is on grassroots. And the stat I was going to mention was that the Music Venues Trust report that I think it was about 10 years ago, 2% of music venues, grassroots music venues, were officially constituted as being not-for-profit. They were officially constituted as being of community value. And that stat now, I think I'm right in saying, has gone to about 15%. And so the recognition that grassroots live music venues and the ecosystem that surrounds it have a social value. That they're not. I mean, I say this and I kind of smile because they're not there to make money. I mean, a lot of music venues don't make money, bizarrely. It's getting a bit better. But live comedy is exactly the same, and I think what's interesting is to, look 10, 15 years ahead and think, well, will live comedy be see a similar growth in terms of officially recognized not-for-profit organizations? And if I'm honest, I think it will, because there is a value in live comedy that is much broader than just making money, just being commercial. Being commercial is fine. I'm not knocking that at all. People have to make money, and they do make a lot of money, and that's great. But there's a grassroots scene that exists which has an intrinsic value much more broad than just making people money, or indeed just making people laugh. Making people laugh is really important and is very positive. But it's not. You're not just going to a comedy club to have a laugh, have a few drinks with your friends, and then go at home. There's much more. It's much more complicated than that.
Do you think, I mean, it's probably snipping ahead several steps in the evolution of the association, but do you see something similar to what the Music Venue Trust have asked for? Is it like a £1 levy on some of the bigger, stuff at Wembley or wherever it may be to fund that grassroots?
The arena levy for music has been phenomenally successful. It was introduced by the government as a voluntary code for arenas to do, and an awful lot, not all, but an awful lot of venues and acts and promoters have signed up to it. I think I'm right in saying is about 2 weeks ago, they announced £500,000 to invest in grassroots live music across the UK. That was in addition to the £250,000 that was announced before Christmas. And they are funding improvements to venues, improvements to working conditions for artists, enabling people to take more risks in terms of tours. In my opinion, unbelievably positive things that are happening. Yes, is the answer to your question. Absolutely. It makes absolute no sense to me that on a Tuesday night, Coldplay will perform at the O2 Arena and generate £25,000 like that overnight for the live music, grassroots live music sector. It makes no sense that then the following night, a comedian, and I'm not going to name names, will perform at the O2 and nothing is generated for grassroots live comedy. For me, that makes no sense. And so, yes, it is something that we included in we published a 5-point action plan that we wanted the government to respond to in October of last year, so October 25, and extending the arena levy to include live comedy was one of them.
And with the Live Comedy Association, what kind of reception have you had from MPs to kind of the things you've put in front of them? Is it kind of, they'll smile and nod and then nothing happens, or do you see movement?
We definitely see movement. I think it was yesterday or the day before, there was yet another question in the Houses of Parliament about the contribution that comedy makes. I think one of the things that a civil servant said to me 2 years ago echoes what I was saying earlier on, and they said to me, nobody's ever asked, Geoff, that there's been nobody that's no one's ever come to us and asked about live comedies, hence the need, I think, for a membership organisation. And I think there is an understanding that it is a sector and it is valid. I think also that it's quite and I'll use this word, and I'm not always very popular when I use this word, if I'm honest, but it's quite a chaotic sector. It's quite fragmented. It's not structured. Who are the people who are able to represent the sector? It's not just the LCA. There are other people as well. And I think they're quite confused. I think MPs in particular are quite confused about how it works. So part of our job in particular is to explain how the sector works. Members of the public, I think, don't know, and why should they? They kind of don't care really. But how does somebody get from doing an open mic slot at their local comedy club to being headlining the O2 in London and then having a series on Netflix? It's a kind of mysterious world that nobody quite understands. There is much clearer progression, I think, and understanding of the progression in other sectors. But in our world, it's, if I had £1 for everyone that's ever said to me, oh, they're hilarious, aren't they? They must just stand up on stage and do it, and I've got a friend who's really funny, so they can, and it's like, well, they can't. It requires experience, skill, writing, rehearsal, all those things to get to the point of where you're a headline comedian. So the response we get is, I would say, really positive. And that is, when I'm having a crap day, I kind of cling on to the fact that I think we are making progress. But I will also say it's slow. The wheels of politics don't move quickly. And I completely understand our current government in particular has lots of things that they need to sort out. And they've got other priorities. I also completely understand that. But goodness, it does sometimes take a long time. That's me being very political, isn't it?
You mentioned about the survey, pick out a few bits from it. I mean, one of them I thought was interesting was 74% responders said they had other paid employment. That had changed from 62% the previous year. And yes, obviously, when people think of comedy and comedians, they might think of those off the telly and those make a living. And yes, it goes all the way through to those who are just doing it for fun. And then there's those who kind of in between, either working their way up or kind of want to do a bit of both and kind of have it as part of a portfolio career. I mean, do you think it is even harder now to kind of make a living? Because I know in a lot of creative industries, they'll say, the price for writing an article or doing an open spot, those kind of things might not have changed for 20 years, the amount, but costs go through the roof.
Yeah, I mean, of course. And there's a whole thing at the moment about fees for comedians and the fact that they've remained the same for, I was going to say 10 years, but possibly longer. So at a certain level, comedians, particularly who are doing comedy clubs, so mixed bill shows where there's like 4 or 5 comedians on with a compere, fees have remained the same. And of course, it's obvious. Costs have gone up. Costs of fuel have gone up. Cost of accommodation has gone up. Everything's gone up. Fees have largely stayed the same, I think, or you could argue have gone down. But that is also true for the venues, the promoters, the agents, the managers, the festivals, everybody else that is working in live comedy, certainly at a grassroots level. And I think, there's lots of issues because it's unregulated. It's completely unregulated. There's an issue around getting paid and how long that takes. That is true for comedians. That is also true for promoters and agents and festival organizers as well. So that's a big issue. There's also, because it's unregulated, there are other issues, in terms of harassment and all sorts of things within live comedy. But pay, I think, is probably one of the biggest, one of them. There's lots of issues because it's an unregulated sector. And I think you mentioned just before we started, anyone can set up a comedy club. You don't need a degree, or you don't have to have any backing to do it. You can just set it up, and that's part of the joy of it. Anyone can become a comedian. That's part of the joy of it. but it does also bring sometimes complications to the whole process about who those people are. So I will say, I think there's an awful lot of very good comedians, promoters, ethical people, and I guess I like working with those people who kind of understand the responsibilities that they have, I guess.
It's good to have that flexibility, but is there almost like a kind of registered society, like a kind of checker trader sort of equivalent for a comedy night or a comedy club where you've kind of got those things? Because yes, I guess it's one thing that often comes up around live comedy is kind of safeguarding and things like that. Because in any kind of nighttime, predominantly nighttime economy, those kind of things are heightened as well.
I mean, as far as I know, there's no sort of kite mark for live comedy. Should there be? I think my personal opinion, this is not an opinion of the Comedy Association, but my own personal opinion is I don't know. I think there are issues to do with enforcement. I think there's issues to do with how it would be funded. I don't know. I mean, of course there should be, people should get paid on time, and of course there should be less harassment, and safeguarding needs to be really important. Safety needs to be really important for everybody working in the industry, in the sector. But should there be a checker trade for comedy? I don't know, and largely I don't know because I can't actually work out how it would work. And so, yeah, that's my personal view. I think the LCA at the moment doesn't, frankly, I mean, it links back to that point really. Frankly, it doesn't have the resource or the capacity to do it. Yeah, I think that's what I think.
Yeah. I mean, maybe a case of not so much kind of full rate and review, but registering with the Live Comedy Association, and there's a sort of list of ethics or mission statement or whatever that someone agrees with is probably a kind of a happy middle ground for something like that.
Yeah.
I might not abide by that, but you'd hope at least that it kind of, it fits in nicely.
Yeah, I mean, Equity, the trade union, did set up a guild of comedians, and they have I can't remember what they call it, but they have a sort of a list of things that they want everybody in live comedy to follow, and not rules, but I don't know what the word is really, but
A charter or a mission statement. Or,
yeah, a charter. That's a good word, a charter. And so I know that they are working to try and implement that as widely as possible, but it's I think it's tough. I think it's tough to do that. But so yeah, Equity, it does exist. Equity do have something. So if people are listening and they want to look that up, it's all on the Equity website. Particularly, I think, for comedians, so individual comedians working on the circuit. I think that does exist.
one kind of side point of that, talk about live comedy is that where does kind of comedy stop and theatre start? In that, it's a very blurred line, which is, there's kind of stand up, there's comedy shows, then there's dramatic shows that, obviously kind of very much bleed into each other.
Well, for example, so we talked about the arena levy, right? So the question I often asked and still ask government and civil servants is, if Bill Bailey performs at the O2 Arena in London, is that music or is that comedy? What is it? So I don't know the answer to that question. But problem with when you get into definitions is you then need to ring fence each individual thing.
Yeah.
I don't see, this might be a woolly answer, and if it is, just challenge me on it, right? And that's absolutely fine. I don't think it really matters. I think, at the moment, for example, there's a hugely successful West End show called The Play That Goes Wrong, which have had live success, but also on TV. And, they're a worldwide global brand. They're ambassadors for Live Comedy Day. And some people, I think, raised a bit of an eyebrow when we said that they were ambassadors of Live Comedy Day, because aren't they theatre? Well, they started in grassroots live comedy venues. They were a sort of, I mean, they'll hate me for saying this, but it was kind of a sketch variety type show. Um, and But I think they are absolutely valid ambassadors for Live Comedy Day, because what they do is live comedy. They perform on stages, they are really there, and they make people laugh. That's live comedy. I think in the UK, we have we are unusual globally in that we sort of ring fence stand-up comedy as a thing. Years and years ago, I did a bit of work in India with some performers, and they were really interested in this because they don't have traditionally. I'm talking about, in the old days, India doesn't have a tradition of stand-up comedy. It has a tradition of clowning and of variety and of entertainers who perform on stages. But stand-up comedy is quite a Western thing, um, and I think for us, for the LCA, if you this does sound woolly, but if you define yourself as working in live comedy, The Play That Goes Wrong, for example, then that's fine. I think having spoken to them in particular, they sort of struggle from it, and I think the extension to that is, is live comedy an art form? Is stand up an art form? Well, my own opinion is, of course it is. There's no difference. But I think what's interesting is, particularly the Arts Council, I think, don't see, despite what a lot of people think, they don't see a difference between the two. I feel like I'm not really answering your question, but
If I had to answer my own question, but a different podcast. But yeah, I'd kind of say, yeah, I think like you kind of said, that if someone feels they're part of comedy, then they are. And, it's as basic as that.
I remember this is a bit name droppy, right? And I try not to do this, but I remember talking to Pam Ayres a number of years ago. I interviewed her a couple of times, once at Leicester and once at Glastonbury, and I remember talking to her about stand up, and I said something like, is it weird that you're not really seen as part of the stand up live comedy world? And she said to me, I think she was a bit grumpy about it, but she sort of said, well, I do. I stand on stage and I entertain people. I make them laugh. There's a bit of storytelling in what she does. There's a bit of poetry, obviously, in what she does. There's a bit of banter with the audience. So she kind of thought she is part of that tradition. But I would put money on the fact that most people wouldn't see Pam Ayres as a stand-up comedian. They would see her as being very funny, and entertaining and humorous and witty and all of that, but they wouldn't define her as a stand-up comedian. But I think I would, and I think she would too. But at the end of the day, it doesn't really matter, does it? It doesn't matter how she defines herself, really. And she's obviously massively successful and brilliant. So that's an example. Bill Bailey is an example. Tim Minchin, is Tim Minchin a musician? Is he a comedian? Well, I don't know.
Talking about there, yes, kind of, is comedy an art form? I'm wondering about your thoughts on kind of what's happening in Ireland, both in terms of the aim to get it recognised as an art form, and then also the artist's basic income. And do you think that those two things could happen in this country?
I think from what I know, the Arts Council England and Arts Council Ireland work in a slightly different way. And in Ireland, as far as I understand it, the Arts Council have sort of officially recognised it as a category. Whereas I think Arts Council England, from what I know, are moving away from sort of, categories. So poetry, glassmaking, theatre, DJing. I think those categorizations sometimes don't help, because if you don't naturally fit, we've talked today about not naturally fitting into those sorts of boxes. It's difficult, but I do think it's really helpful. I mean, that's an understatement, but really helpful that Arts Council Ireland have recognised live comedy as a thing. So yeah, and will it happen here? If I'm honest, I doubt it. I doubt it will, because the Arts Council England Arts Council Wales and Scotland are slightly different. But Arts Council England, I think, are moving away from those historic categorizations of what they do and don't fund. The importance seems to be on and this does sound bureaucratic, but on the output and the impact that's made. It could be anything happening in this context on the stage to an audience. The Arts Council are interested in, and so what, and who goes, what the impact is, what's the artistic integrity of the work. It doesn't matter whether it's dance, music, drama, comedy, whatever. So I think that is unlikely, but I do think the work that's happening in Ireland is amazing, and the people behind that are just a phenomenal bunch of enthusiastic people. One person in particular who's just passionate about it and has driven it forward, and fair play to them.
You're talking about festivals, and obviously you've been heavily involved in Leicester over the years. Do you see them as a kind of separate thing, or very much part of it? And also, I mean, kind of talking about, speaking to MPs and all this kind of thing, something like the Leicester Comedy Festival, the Edinburgh Fringe, these are enormous things that kind of generate worldwide interest that you can, you kind of say, shove that under their noses and go, look at this, this is kind of what this country can do.
Well, I think you and probably people listening will be massively surprised if I say, comedy festivals, they're not that important, really. I think comedy festivals. Oh, this is where I'm only sighing because I spend a lot of my time talking to politicians and civil servants. So I am guilty of adopting their language sometimes. So this might sound like I'm a bureaucrat, right? And that's fine, I suppose. People can judge me for what they want. But I think there's a lot of talk at the moment within government, within civil servants and policymakers about regional hubs and the importance of regions and blah, 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 blah. We have a network of regional hubs for comedy in this country, and they're called comedy festivals. And they're a significant part of the R&D part of our world and our sector. They're a significant part of audience development, engagement with different communities, community projects, social impact, etc., 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 etc. So, of course, I will say comedy festivals are a really important part of the ecosystem because of all of that. And the number of, I can't remember the stat now, but the number of people who came to the Leicester Comedy Festival when I was doing it, and I see no reason why it's changed, and it's their only occasion where they experience live comedy, is significant. And I believe like festivals like Latitude and Glastonbury have the same. The only time they see the audience see live comedy is when they go to predominantly music festivals. So I think festivals play that role, and they also, certainly Leicester, supports, again, I sound like a bureaucrat, they support the ecosystem. So they support promoters, they support agents, they support all sorts of parts of the sector to navigate that. And then the last thing I'll say is that they also develop, particularly promoters. I mean, I can't tell you how many people, individuals, started their careers through Leicester Comedy Festival predominantly by coming to me and saying, there's one person in particular who I met years ago who came to me and said, why aren't there comedy festivals in Market Harborough, which is a town just outside Leicester? You need to put on more comedy shows in Market Harborough. And I said to them, well, that would be great if there was more stuff in Market Harborough, but you could do it. And this person was like, no, I can't. And I said, yes, you can. We will support you. We will mentor you. We will hold your hand and enable you to do it. Anyway, that person went on to become a comedy promoter, and they promoted stuff in the comedy festival and also throughout the year in Market Harborough. There's another person I can think of, a performer, who came to me, similar thing. Why are there no comedy shows in my local area? And I've written a piece that I want to put on in the festival. And I was like, okay, well, you do it. And there's loads of examples of that, where people get their first taste of it in a fairly safe, controlled environment, and then go on to be working in live comedy. And festivals do that across the board, really. You know, they give people the opportunity and the excuse and the reason to do it. So I think festivals are really important. Of course they are.
Do you see the Live Comedy Association almost having like a kind of, whether it's a starter pack or a, user guide or whatever it may be, for someone to say, I would like to have a comedy night once every other month or whatever it may be. How do I do it? How do I go about it? Tips for promotion, social media, all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, I mean, we don't currently. We would love to do that. But I think it comes, I sound a bit like a broken record when I say this, but it's down to capacity. I think sometimes people think the Live Comedy Association is this, is like Equity or is like Music Venues Trust. Music Venues Trust employ 20 permanent members of staff, right? Their capacity is much, much bigger than the Live Comedy Association. So yes, absolutely that. And we're currently looking at the support that we will offer comedians specifically. Comedians represent almost 50% of our membership, so almost 750 people out of the 1,500. And we recognize that we need to support them. So we do already with things like we do events around the UK, kind of panel events, giving advice and support and stuff. And we have an advisory panel, which is 20 people who've worked in live comedy mainly for a long time, and again stolen from music. But the music industry have these kind of music gurus who will offer support to emerging people. We want to do that as well with live comedy, but it's something that we can't do at the moment. We can't do everything, so that focus on getting government to recognise live comedy as an essential part of the creative industries is our mantra at the moment, and that's the main thing that we're doing. But yeah, sure, in time, I think those things that you mentioned would be really valuable.
Thanks to Geoff for coming onto the podcast. You can find out more details about Live Comedy Day and the Live Comedy Association in the show notes. If you enjoyed this, check out our other episodes of variety comedians, musicians, authors and others in creative industries talking about trying to make creativity pay. Thanks for listening.